Hey there, it's Olivia Savannah here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to give you an unhaul. We have a couple of books that I no longer feel like they need to be here on my shelf, and we are going to be moving them right along, letting them find some new homes today. So I've got 20 books here to show you, and I usually do this in categories, so we're going to get right down to start with the DNFs, of which there are, as always, quite a few. As I keep mentioning over the course of my wrap-ups and throughout this year, I have been trying to dig into quite a few of the oldest books on my TBR, so I've been really paying attention to the oldest 100, and sometimes that works out well and sometimes that works out not so well. One of the occasions where it didn't work out so well was when I tried to read The Women of Troy by Pat Barker, which is the sequel to The Silence of the Girls. Now, back when I read The Silence of the Girls, which is a retelling of the Achilles and Patroclus story pretty much from the perspective of women, I really enjoyed it, and I know that it got a lot of critique for just being a bit too much about sexual assault, but at that time I did enjoy it, and I read more historical fiction and I was reading more Greek mythology retellings than I do now. But reading this at this point, I just was not enjoying it. I hated that it was supposed to be about women and from the perspective of women, and yet we were seeing so many perspectives of men. I also didn't like that all of the women were downtrodden and kept as slaves. I just wasn't enjoying this, and I didn't find it very feminist. And so now I feel like I fall more into the camp where I'm like, actually I don't think it's the most feminist Greek mythology retelling out there, and it was just not ticking my boxes, so I decided to stop reading. Homebodies by Tembe, Denton-Hurst, and I read about 100 pages of this before giving up. I feel like there's a category of black literature, which I've spoken about a lot, where it's written by black people but is not necessarily catered towards very much so the black audience. I feel like this one is a bit more than some of the other ones that I've read, but it still just wasn't ringing true to me in a way that I would want to for my literary fiction. It's about this black woman who is kind of edged out of her job due to racism and her not writing about what they want her to write about. She's a journalist and she's a lesbian, and she lives at home with her girlfriend, who is absolutely lovely. Like sunshine rains from that woman's, I don't know, hair pores or whatever, but she is so terrible to her girlfriend. She's just so terrible to her girlfriend, and her girlfriend is nothing but lovely to her. So I was really struggling to be on side of the main character, and I also felt like she was so helpless. Like, she knew what was coming for her, she knew that her job was not a great place to be, and yet she still just kind of buried her head in the sand. So I was really struggling with how mean and unlikable this character was, and at the end I just couldn't take it. I'm not a reader who typically enjoys reading about unlikable characters, and if I don't like the characters that I'm supposed to be rooting for, I do tend to dip out of a book. That's just the kind of reader that I am, and so this was not a book for me. I started reading and DNF'd within 50 pages, Begin Again by Emma Lord. This was when I was going on a string of DNFs, of DNFing things back to back, because I was just trying to settle into something good, and this was not giving me that kind of good. It's a young adult contemporary where we're following this girl who goes to a uni to be with her boyfriend, and also because her mum used to go to that uni and her mum has passed away. But when she gets there, she finds out that her boyfriend tried to surprise her as well by transferring to her uni, and so they're in different places, and she's just kind of at this uni trying to connect to her mother, struggling a bit with her relationship with her father, and really just trying to be a fixer-upper for everyone around her. It was just so US university experience, run-of-the-mill slice of life. Like, there was no plot, it was just her trying to be a fixer-upper to everyone and get closer to her mother. That was it. I can tell that there's going to be a romance between her and the RA, and it feels like it's just like borderline on cheating. She knows that her relationship, or emotionally cheating, because she knows that her relationship with her boyfriend is coming to an end, or at least the boyfriend definitely knows that, maybe she doesn't. I can't read a slice of life book for this long. If you're going to give me this much, there needs to be a plot. And I know that in young adult contemporaries, sometimes that plot is self-discovery, but I don't think she was going to self-discover a lot about her own identity. Like, she was a complete person. Maybe she needs to know how to relax, but other than that, it's more about her solving other people's problems than her own, which of course is something that she needs to work through, but it still was just too gentle. It was too soft. It wasn't really giving me anything that I tend to take away from young adult contemporary, so I thought this is not the book for me and I stopped reading it. A very sad DNF and a very quick one was Mary, The Rebirth of Frankenstein by Anne Eekhout. Now, I love Frankenstein. I think it's one of the best classics ever, and so I was very excited for this historical retelling that did not focus on the creation of Frankenstein or the story of Frankenstein itself, but more so a retelling of who Mary is as a person and how she came to be the person who could create this story. But as I was reading it, I was just finding the writing very, very mediocre. It's very, very historical as well, and I don't tend to read that much historical fiction anymore. And I just was bored. I was bored by this story because actually, if you think about it at its essence, it's just about a woman and how she comes to write this story, and that's not that much of a plot. I'm sure there's more drama that's going to happen if you read on further, but for the mediocre writing level that it is at, I was not a fan, and so I decided to DNF it. I think if I am going to be reading a story like this, the writing needs to be rich and engaging and beautiful to get me through the slowness of the story. As long as you give me atmosphere, I can stay tuned in. This was not giving me any of that, and so I'm going to pass this along. Another DNF that I read a quarter of is The Last Fee Hunter by Salinee Goldenberg. This is a Thai-inspired fantasy novel, and it is very unique and it is very fun, but I could foresee it being a low or middle of the road read for me, so I just decided I was going to give up where I was and I wasn't in the mood to read a 3-star book. Sometimes I'm in the mood where I don't mind cruising through something and it being a good time but not a long time, and when I was reading this I was not in that particular mood. What I did like about this one is that our main character is really fun and engaging. The world and the mythology elements are really, again, fun and brilliant and bold, and I also liked that we meet this woman that he's going to go traveling with, and she is pregnant and she knows how to kick butt, and I just loved that. I feel like we don't have enough. We're going on a journey and there's going to be adventures, but this woman is pregnant. However, the situation very quickly changed from that beginning, and then the plot kicked in, and I was just like, I'm not as invested in the plot as I was when we first met these two characters that were in those situations then, so I'm just gonna let it lie here. I think this is one that if you do read it all the way to the end, it could have had the potential to be a low 4 or a high 3. It could have surprised me. I just wasn't in the mood to wait it out, and so it's not one that I'm actually going to say don't go and read this. It just wasn't one for me at that moment, and I've decided not to keep it. Another quick DNF, I think this was 50 pages, was A Multitude of Dreams by Mara Rutherford. This is a retelling of Edgar Allan Poe's short story The Mask of Death, and it was a very quick DNF for me because the writing was just not there. It wasn't really good writing. It was very surface level YA writing that just doesn't gel with me, that I know some people can read. I don't want to be mean, but it is kind of the writing that I would expect from people who enjoy Fourth Wing and enjoy Throne of Glass. They might enjoy this book more than I did, but for me it's just a bit too surface level for me to be able to get into that writing style. It just doesn't work for me. I also think the story itself just wasn't very believable. Like, it was doing the work of setting up this world where this plague has existed and where some people spend all of their time confined within their house, and some people go out and do things and risk the illness, and then there are people who don't get the illness at all, and it just was all a bit jumbled and confusing because why do certain people have to stay confined to their house when others can go out and be just fine? I just wasn't really there with the world building that it was presenting, and so it just wasn't gelling for me. I did read some spoilers about how vampires come into play with this, and other readers were saying they were just a bit lost in what world building the author was trying to do, so I thought actually I'm going to cut my losses here and move on. And the last DNF that we have is quite a sad one because I've actually never DNF'd a poetry collection before, but this is my very first time doing so with Good Lord by Ella Ferraz, which I was really looking forward to. It's a poetry collection about somebody who has to do something for their landlord, and it's commentary on property and ownership and what it's like in the rental market. And it's one long email. It's written as an email that is complaining to the landlady. But as well as that, it's still very poetical, and I loved the poetry in this. With poetry, I think a lot of it is, again, about stylistic devices and choices and language, and if you gel with that, you're going to enjoy the poetry collection. And I really, really loved the writing style. I think sometimes when there were phrases and words, I was just like, oh, you go off, sis. This is just too good. But The problem with it is that because it's one long email instead of individual poems, it tells a narrative and it tells a story, and the format in which it's chosen to do that is stream of consciousness. And I'm someone who can sometimes get behind stream of consciousness when it is streamlined. This is not streamlined. It is moving all over the place. It's dipping into different divots and random antidotes, and I just wasn't coming together as a collection for me. We were going here, we were going there, and I felt like we were losing the point of it being about property and rental, and just it frustrated me that it just was missing all over the mark. So I decided to DNF it because I just couldn't see myself enjoying it as a whole, even though I was loving the writing. And I wouldn't say no to reading poetry by Ella Faraz in the future, it's just a no on the Good Lord collection. Next up in this unhaul, I'm going to talk about 2 books that I read all the way through and I did not like, and therefore I will not be keeping. Those are automatic unhauls for me. And the very first one, even though it's a special edition that's part of a collection, is The Ballad of Songbird and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. I read this and I didn't like it at all. I was bored all the way through. In the book's defense, I had seen the film before I watched this, and also in the book's defense, I never intended to read this book. I did not read it for several years. In the end, I wanted the collector's edition of the original trilogy, and it just came with this one. And so I thought, since I have it, I might as well give it a read, and that was a mistake. I just shouldn't have. I think these games, like, we are here, we go into the Hunger Games to hear about the games, and these games were really, really boring for multiple reasons. First off being that you can barely see the contestants for a lot of it, but also just the ring itself, it's not the most investing and fun games. I feel like Coriolanus's point of view was the wrong point of view for this story. I really wish it had been a mix of Coriolanus, Sejanus and Lucy's perspective. That would have made the story much more invigorating, more twisty feeling, more suspenseful, but no, we just got Coriolanus's sour, boring, flat, bland point of view all of the way through. I didn't connect with his character, you're not supposed to sympathise with his character, and so it just really wasn't working for me. I wanted to know more about Lucy and about the decisions and choices she was making and what she was going through, because ultimately she's in the games and that story is a whole load more interesting to me to read. After the games are done, this book continues because we're following Coriolanus and he isn't part of the games. So everything after that point, you kind of know where it has to end up, and to be fair, you don't know what's going to happen in the middle, but ultimately the suspense driver just wasn't there because we are so firmly rooted in knowing how everything has to end that I was just bored all the way through this book. I was bored, and yeah. And then painfully I read Pageboy by Elliot Page, and I didn't like this memoir, and I will just tell you about it. Elliot Page is one of the most famous trans celebrities out there, and I have a lot of respect for him and everything that he's been through, and I'm fully supportive of him. So it's not to do with me being like anti-trans rights, that's not this kind of channel. It's just the fact that this memoir is poorly structured in my opinion. It is structured where the chapters are jumping all over the chronology of his timeline, and there seems to be no rhyme or reason as to why the chapters were structured that way, and it felt like a recitation of everything that has happened to Elliot. This happened to me, then this happened to me, then this happened to me, and I'm telling you this. I'm not really going to give you any of the emotional impact that it had, what I've learned since, what I'm taking away from it. It just felt like Elliot wanted to tell his story, which is fine, but when you're writing a memoir or crafting a memoir, it needs to be more than a telling. It needs to be a showing, because tell over show is not the right way to write something. But also, we are here to learn and to connect to you, and it's hard to do that when it's devoid of all of those emotional recognitions, epiphany moments or reflections, and this just didn't have any of those in there, which was really, really disappointing as someone who really wanted to enjoy this memoir. So now that we're done with those, I'm now going to unhaul books that I've read and finished and I found them to be okay and middle of the road, and I'll tell you my reasons why. And we've got a trilogy here, the whole trilogy is going, and that is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I have the complete trilogy. I don't know how I got this first one. I think I bought it from the works, and then these two were from Hannah's Unhaul, and I thought I hadn't read this one by that point, and I thought if she's unhauling it, maybe I can just get them all in one go. So I did, and yeah, I'm just unhauling the other two unread. So A Good Girl's Guide to Murder is a young adult murder mystery that is very popular and very famous and has a TV series adaptation, and I thought it was middle of the road. I thought it was fine. I think the mystery itself is pretty good, although I did manage to work things out. I still think it's a murder mystery that had clues leading up to it and is a solid mystery to follow. My main problem here is the main character. She is so driven on solving this mystery that we don't get any sense of her personality other than she is here to solve this mystery. She teams up with somebody else called Ravi, who has a personal connection to why this murder mystery needs to be solved. We don't really get much of his personality other than the fact that he is someone who's had all of these things happen to him and he's grieving, and that's his personality. And so I found for the two main characters, their personalities were very, very flat, and so it was just not enjoyable to read about them. This is not a character-driven book, it's very much a plot-driven book. And they are the only characters you get to know. There are loads of secondary characters, nearly all of them are suspects, and even then you don't get to know them. You just get to know them for the point of how it's going to help you solve this mystery. So in terms of being a character-driven reader, this is just not the best trilogy for it. I've heard that the characterization really steps up in the second one, but I'm a firm believer of if I don't enjoy the first book in a series enough, I'm just not going to continue on to read the rest. They will languish on my shelf forever and I won't feel motivated to pick them up, so there's no point in me holding on to them. For Gothtober, I read The Unworthy by Agustina Bazterrica. This is the proof. It comes out in March 2025, and I thought this was okay in the end. I actually read this and it took me a long time to get my thoughts together and get my feelings together because I really wasn't sure if I liked it, if I didn't, if I'd loved it, if I'd hated it. I was all over the shop. I now have had time to think and process, and I do think it's just a middle of the road read. So this one is set in a post-apocalyptic world, and we're following this woman who seems to be at this strange convent in this community that is very closed off from everybody else. It was disturbing, it was horrifying. I think Agustina Bazterrica is a brilliant writer. That is undeniable. The writing in this is very, very good. It kept me on edge. Her sense of creating atmosphere is iconic and perfect. I was just enraptured in this setting, in this place. The unsettled feeling that was in my heart maintained its way all through this quite short novel. I just don't think the plot did enough for me, and I wanted the plot to do more. I wanted to have more resolutions at the end. I just wanted to have more of a plot thread other than this building mountain sense of dread and atmosphere. It was just a middle of the road read, and I don't need to keep the proof. I also, again, reading the oldest books on my TBR, read The Mermaid and the Black Conch by Monique Roffey. This is about a black mermaid who is caught by these fishermen of an island, and they haul her in and she starts to turn back into a human and she falls in love. Read this and it was one of those times which is like really rare and really strange, but it's happened twice with Agustina Bazterrica and then this one, where I think the writing is fantastic, where I think the dialogue is amazing, their sense of atmosphere perfect. I loved being on this island with these choking small town feels, and the writing is just so beautiful, but the plot just I wasn't a big fan of the love story that we got. I couldn't root for these characters and their love story because the way that they described the woman, the way they described the mermaid was really grotesque. It was really overly sexual, the sexual assault that happens in this, and it was just so intrusive. The language around her is very juvenile, like this young innocent child who doesn't know what is happening, who doesn't know what's happening to her body, doesn't know how to control it, and then them being very sexually attracted to her. It just didn't quite match up with me and it made me uncomfortable. So yeah, a mixed bag. Don't feel like I need to keep it. We've got two books here by Benjamin Dean, How to Die Famous and The King is Dead. I read Me, My Dad and the End of the Rainbow by Benjamin Dean, which is his middle grade, which is not here because I'm keeping it. I gave that 5 stars and I absolutely loved it. I then moved on to read How to Die Famous by Benjamin Dean because I do enjoy the young adult murder mystery genre, and this one is a bit of a murder mystery full of black, queer main characters, and it's set in a celebrity world. They're all part of this TV series and they are being like tracked down, and we're following somebody whose brother was murdered and he's trying to figure out who did it on this set. Now, Our main character, Abel, who you follow, is just the worst detective ever. He makes so many mistakes, he's not discreet at all, he gets caught out multiple times, and if I am going to follow a character who's supposed to be doing some detective work, I need them to not stumble their way through the plot, I need them to actually be intelligent, and so I didn't appreciate his solving of the situation. But you also get everybody else's point of view, and I just don't feel like these point of views differed enough from one another. They were very overlapping, they were very similar, and the whole time I was reading it I was just feeling very mediocre about it. You got to suspend your disbelief, partly because I don't think Abel would have been able to piece things together and solve this mystery, but also just because the ending felt like such a stretch, and I decided I don't want to read more of his young adult, The King is Dead. So even though I haven't read this one or even tried to read it, I'm just going to unhaul it, pass both of these along, but I know that Benjamin Dean has more middle grade and I'm going to be reading that. I also read The Worst Ronin by Maggie Tokuda-Hall, and the art is by Faith Shaffer. This is a young adult graphic novel which is like a fun time. I read it and it was fun and it was quick and it was easy. I just felt like it was quite confused. It is a samurai story, but it's set in the present day, and things like mobile phones and guns exist while they're fighting with swords and such, and I don't think that was ever married very well together. We don't really get a sense of understanding of this is how phones fit into the narrative and this is how guns and swords can be in the same battles and fights. Like, it just wasn't really working for me, and the humour was just a little bit all over the place. There were fart jokes in it, but by the time that I was a teenager, which is the age audience for this, I was very over fart jokes. Like, I didn't find them funny, and some of the humour in this just missed its mark for me. But at the same time, I did really like the budding friendship that the two main characters form and how they have to learn to work together and compromise for each other's weaknesses and strengths. So I did enjoy the friendship that we saw, and it was a quick and easy read. The artwork was simple. I'm never going to write home about it as my favourite artwork, but it did what it needed to do to tell the story. I just don't feel like it's one I'm ever going to revisit, and therefore it's not one I need to keep on my shelf. And then lastly within this category, I have To Sweeten Bitter by Raymond Antrobus, which is his debut poetry collection. Now, Raymond Antrobus is one of my all-time favourite poets. I think he's third in line, so my third favourite poet ever. And you might be wondering, Olivia Svanna, why are you unhauling one of his poetry collections when you love his poetry so much? And that's simply because this is his debut and I've read his later works. So going back to his debut, I could see the unpolished gem that is his poetry that we get later on. I can see how his skills and talents are really depicted well here in his poetry, which is about deafness, which is about blackness, which is about his relationship with his parents. And then I can see how, from the poetry I have read, it's only gotten better from there, and therefore I enjoy those poetry collections more because they are better than this one. And if I'd read this first and then moved along, I think I could have appreciated it more, but I didn't. I read it backwards. So that's just where I fall on this, and I thought it was fine. I do think this is very accessible and easily readable, and often when Raymond Antrobus performs some of his poetry, because I've seen him perform his poetry multiple times now, he tends to do some of the poems that are in this collection, and I think seeing them performed is actually better than seeing them written down. So there's that to take note of as well. We've got three more books here. So the first one is a book that I actually really enjoyed, but I've just decided not to keep. It's rare that this happens, but sometimes it does. And that's Juliet Takes a Breath by Gaby Rivera. This is a young adult contemporary about a Latin butch lesbian who is kind of coming into her own identity and figuring out her takes on feminism, on queer history. This book is really, really important because it's saying some very, very important things about the queer community and about intersectional queer spaces. I think that in the process of getting to it saying that, it has to trawl through a lot of transphobia and homophobia, which might be difficult for people who are queer to read, but as someone who's not queer myself, I was able to read this and get a lot of information from it and get to the ending and see the outcome of these discussions that I had throughout the book. It's also a young adult contemporary where the focus is not on the romance, and I appreciate that. There's a lot about romantic feelings and partners and what that means and what is polyamory, so it does get messy in terms of Juliet's love story, but it's not a romance at its heart. It's more of an identity exploration, which I was also perfectly fine with. I just think that there are a couple things that this book says that are not addressed that needed to be addressed. And I'm not going to say this book is problematic and you shouldn't read it for that reason. I still fully recommend this. I give it 4 stars. I still really enjoyed it. I just think there's a couple of things to take note of, and I think Corey's review on Goodreads did a very good job of pointing those things out while simultaneously praising the novel for as good as it is. So I'll leave a link to their Goodreads review down below. But I did really enjoy this. I just don't have that much shelf space anymore, and I think this could do well with more people reading this book. And then lastly, we have 2 books I'm just not going to read, and so I've decided to unhaul them unread from my shelves. And the first one is Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. I've had this on my shelf for quite a while. It was Women's Prize longlisted, and I do tend to enjoy the picks that the Women's Prize choose, but I have kind of had it with a certain type of white girl sad fiction. It's very trendy right now, it's very popular, and that's fine. Like, the people who enjoy those books, you read them and you enjoy them. Where I am at with my reading taste and my reading journey right now, it's just not for me, and so Sorrow and Bliss kind of falls into that category, and I've decided I just don't have any interest in reading it. I was looking at my shelves, or more so I was doing a bookshelf reorganisation and sharing my entire TBR video with you guys, and I realised, yeah, I'm just not gonna ever really reach for this, so why is it there? And last but not least, we have A Million to One by Adiba Jaguda. Now, I have read one of her books now. I've read The Do's and Donuts of Falling in Love, and I read it and I enjoyed it and I gave it 4 stars, but I decided not to keep it. And I've got the Henna Wars on the shelf behind me, literally right there, so I'll be reading the Henna Wars at some point. But I just have a feeling that Adiba Jaguda's books are ones that I read and I enjoy, and I don't feel a need to hold on to. I can just pass them along. And while I do really want to read the Henna Wars still, and I might read Hannah, the fake dating one she has, I don't really have that much interest in A Million to One. I got this for free when I went to an event, which was actually for the Do's and Donuts of Falling in Love, but this book was included in the goodie bag, and it's the one where fans of Adiba's books say this is their least favourite, like unanimously. That seems to be the consensus. So I'm not gonna read the one that everybody thinks is their least favourite. It just has turned me off it, and I don't have that much interest in reading it, and so I'm gonna pass it along to someone who might want to read it more. And there you have it. Those are all the books that are leaving my shelf. I have books coming in all the time, so I like to keep my shelves fluid, keep making space. I don't think I've got any more space, but I will try to keep making space by unhauling books and see how fast that space fills up. Please let me know in the comment section down below, what was the last time you heard or read a review of a book excluding this video, and what book was reviewed? Did you agree with that review or not? Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!